The Falkland Islands are widely known for their pristine waters that host a community of aquatic mammals and birds, attracting visitors from far and wide. Whilst the dolphins, whales and penguins are renowned for populating these waters, it's often forgotten that the ecosystems in which they thrive are sustained by something vital growing just beneath the water's surface.
Kelp forests are hugely abundant in Falklands waters, with an estimated area of 830 kilometres squared of the stuff spanning the coastal environment as of 2021. How the resource may be of financial benefit to the island's economy has been discussed for over a century.
The exploration into the establishment of a profitable kelp industry in the Falklands dates back to as early as 1915, when Governor at the time William Douglas Young was made aware of the idea from his predecessor William Allardyce. It was suggested that harvesting kelp from the native kelp forests could be used for the production of potash, a chemical used in agricultural manure. On the 29th of March 1916, members of Executive Council at the time came to the opinion that such an industry could not be profitably undertaken. A proposal to capitalise on Falklands kelp was once again explored in the 1940s when the British-American Kelp Company approached the Colonial Secretary asking for permission to harvest kelp within Stanley Harbour in January 1947. Ultimately, this pilot project was abandoned, with the estimated cost of production being too high.
Archival documents show that after this failed attempt in the 40s, production eventually got off the ground in the 60s via a company named Alginet Industries. The locally well-known Mr. Frederick Dudley Gooch was resident engineer of the company, which was ran out of a factory on the Front Road, now the location of the Capstan gift shop.
This harvesting process was with the intention of extracting alginates from the kelp for use in textiles, food products and pharmaceuticals, among a variety of other uses. Documents are unclear as to the length of time that production persisted, but it came to an end shortly after its conception. Diversifying the Falkland Islands economy has always been a big motivator to support kelp harvesting, with the Secretary of State for the Colonies saying in a letter to His Excellency the Governor, Sir Geoffrey Miles Clifford, in 1947, "I fear that unless the initial labour difficulty is overcome, we may miss a unique opportunity of promoting a measure of industrialisation at a time when world conditions are most favourable for success of project, and that in consequence the colony may be forced on to little more than the intermittent employment of sheep farming."
Kelp harvesting was once again revisited in 2005, when the Falkland Islands Development Corporation conducted an assessment into the marketing opportunities for the natural seaweed that exists around the coast of the islands. This focused on exploring options to harvest and use different types of natural seaweed present in the waters. Around this time, FIDC were also investigating seaweeds as animal feed and fertiliser.
Richard Cockwell, member of the Legislative Assembly at the time, investigated the profitability of the industry, looking at one type of kelp in particular.
We've got all this kelp around, lots of seaweeds, all sorts of interesting things on the beaches. And so I harvested various types of kelp, different types, and dried them and hammered them and got them analysed. And they were really quite interesting what you could do with them. And so I thought I'd take it further. And so I got the report from Professor Westermeyer from Chile, who'd written a report for FIDC. And that, it really said that the best thing to go for were the carrageenans, which is a type of kelp, because that's used in cosmetics, it's used in food, it's used in paint, it's used all over the place. In fact, it still appears to be the most interesting type of alginate that you can use. And I found that the sort of prices that they would pay for dried seaweeds in Europe and such like, although the final product was very valuable, the initial product wasn't actually very attractive. And so I dropped it. I couldn't see the added value that we would be looking for. And also the problems of drying the product. There was always problems about how you would dry it, and energy was very expensive in those days.
In 2010, FIDC collaborated with a Falklands student undertaking her dissertation on the benefits of supplemental feeding of raw kelp to sheep. The trial conducted was short, and the results statistically inconclusive, but demonstrated that sheep are happy eating the kelp and no detrimental effects were observed.
Research since this time has found a multitude of benefits and uses of kelp, as well as a better understanding of the services that it provides to the environments in which it thrives. The value of kelp and the so-called ecosystem services that it provides to the Falklands are wide-ranging and hard to quantify. But some scientists did try and settled on the estimated figure of £2.6 billion per year as of 2021. But the true value of the forests and the services it provides are likely to be even higher still.
Some of that value comes from provisions to fisheries. So the kelp forests provide nursery environments to loligo, various finfish species, and species that provide food or trophic links to other species on the shelf. And a good example of that, a really good example of that is lobster krill. Everything from nutrient cycling to coastal protection, so a bit like a barrier coral reef. The coast is protected by kelp forests. They reduce the wave energy. Carbon capture, which is really important. And also, a lot of our kelp species are really, most of our kelp is really important to the ecosystem function of the Falklands ecosystem. That's not just this inshore environment, because it's all interlinked, as you can imagine.
There are two ways that kelp can be collected: kelp harvesting and kelp farming. Harvesting typically involves chopping the tops off existing kelp plants growing in native kelp beds. Kelp grows at an exponential rate, up to 1 metre a day in places like California, so this growth replenishes quickly.
When they say harvesting wild kelp, they would be cutting off the tops of it. So it anchors itself on the seabed. It doesn't have roots into the seabed. It attaches to rock and surfaces. So it can be torn off in storms, and you often see those structures. They're called holdfasts. It's a sensitive, important part of the Falklands marine habitats, and so anyone, if you want to harvest wild kelp, you'd have to go slowly, I think.
The top of the canopy, it has a suite of communities in itself, so a bit like a rainforest. Every part of it is utilised by different animals and plants, and that's really important. The other thing is, if you're also removing the top, you're also removing a lot of sort of what you call dead water or stagnant water, because they'll splay around over the top, particularly at low tide, and that reduces wave energy even further. So you're likely to affect the hydrodynamics of the coastal environment as well in that particular area of harvest. You're also removing the plant's ability to maintain its rate of carbon capture. And considering that this area inshore is a currently proposed MMA, and there would be at some point some designation, sort of not doing something sensibly in terms of environmentally responsible is probably not conducive to that process.
It's not just the plant, we're talking about the whole ecosystem, and it gets quite broad. Kelp is really important, it seems, for things like tussock birds who, skim across the surface and eat, crustaceans and amphipods and things off the surfaces of these kelp rafts around the place. So there's lots of linkages that are important when you start considering that word, sustainability.
The second way to collect kelp is kelp farming, the cultivation and harvesting of new kelp, not touching any established kelp forests at all. Kelp farming is a popular industry across Asia and Europe, with many farms popping up across the UK, one of them being Seagrown. Wave Crux co-founded Seagrown in 2018 after calling the Falkland Islands an intermittent home for a while between 2015 and 2018. Whilst working with the British Antarctic Survey, Crux met his wife and co-founder of the company on an Antarctic expedition setting sail from Stanley.
Seagrown is an offshore seaweed farming company based in Scarborough, which is in northeastern England, in Yorkshire. We are the UK's first and only offshore seaweed farming company. We've been working for the last 2 years to develop a whole new end-to-end seaweed cultivation system that can work in offshore environments. We grow seaweed on growing units which go into the sea. We put seed onto those units and they're individually mowed with a sinker on the seabed, afloat on the surface, and the growing unit suspended at the right depth below it. We have a quite sophisticated hatchery system to provide that seed material which goes into the water, and we have a line of hydraulic deck machinery which is mounted on our workboat. The machinery line basically runs right down the middle of the boat, and you drop a little ramp on the front of the boat, haul these units on board. Mechanically and automatically, the seaweed is stripped off, the seed is added, and they go straight back into the water again, and you move on to the next one. And the weather operating window for that is massively extended over what it would have been if we were still using the traditional long line system, which is really, really restricted by weather. We can deploy the equivalent of the length of a long line's worth of seed into the water in about 15 or 20 minutes, where previously it's taken us 4, 5, 6 hours to do that when we've been working manually on the long lines previously in previous years. So it's a huge step forward, and now that allows us to work offshore in any shaped area and with other industry as well, which is absolutely critical.
Although kelp farming is a process that could have a much lower environmental impact in the Falklands, there are still serious considerations that must be made if farms were to be set up here.
You start culturing kelp in the middle of the Sound, for example, and we don't know much about the genetic structure and the population connectivity between different areas of the Sound and different populations. The danger is that we might be diluting locally adapted populations. So all of that work would probably need to be done. It's not saying that it can't be done, but some recent work has shown that just because of the complex nature of the Falklands hydrography, meaning the circulation, and the reason it's so complex is because we've got so many islands, is that some areas are connected and others aren't, and those populations will be closed. So you would need to be assured that you weren't diluting any genetic stock or something like that.
One solution to this concern could be to move operations into offshore waters. Whilst the environmental effects of doing this would have to be further investigated, the benefits could change how kelp farming has been approached in the islands thus far.
If you're offshore, it means you can get to scale. There's a lot of offshore, but we're not making any more inshore sheltered water. But the price for that is you've got to be able to have a system that can live in that environment, it can work in that environment, and it can stay mowed. And it allows us to get it away, get seaweed farming away from areas where there might be conflicting uses for that patch of sea. So for instance, close to port approaches, or in fishing grounds, or in recreational areas, or on main shipping routes. We can locate well away from all of that and make sure that we can work with all these other essential marine industries so that we all get enough water to use for our industry.
The kelp drying process has been cited as an obstacle to exporting product from the islands. Using equipment like polytunnels may solve this issue, or alternatively, the process could be skipped altogether.
Drying is a process which you don't have to follow for every product that you make from seaweed. There's only certain products that you have to dry, really. But if you do, a good way to tackle it is to try and locate your drying unit close to waste heat from another process. So we have a polytunnel, quite straightforward, horticultural polytunnel. We can supply that with waste heat, but actually normally just the sunlight will do it. And if you had to do it all year round, you could use waste heat from other process, such as refrigeration. We have a refrigerated container with some scientific equipment in there for part of our hatchery. The waste heat from that is significant. So that heat needs to be channeled into the polytunnel to actually help the sun do its job when it's not quite such a warm day. But I think the main thing to remember is you don't have to dry the seaweed for all these products. And actually, I wouldn't be looking to do that, depending on what the end use for the seaweed is going to be.
Given the geographic location of the Falkland Islands, shipping costs have previously been thought to outweigh the profits made from the raw kelp. This could be solved by processing it here within the islands.
I do know that shipping is expensive, and I would guess that the way to make that more economical would be to turn it into a product of some sort on the islands before shipping it. I don't think there would be an awful lot of economic benefit to shipping raw, fresh, frozen, whatever, dried kelp. Turn it into a product first and ship that from the islands. That would change the economic picture completely.
The economics of the kelp industry are evolving, with recent developments in seaweeds being used as supplements and feed for livestock. It has been proven that some types of seaweed can reduce the methane and nitrous oxide output from livestock farming. Livestock production currently makes up an estimated 11.1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. With the global shift towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, this could revolutionise the kelp industry.
One of the really interesting things about certain seaweeds which actually contain components that suppress methane emissions in livestock. So there are a huge range of opportunities for seaweed production in the future into high added value products. And that's where the fascination and innovation lies, because we want to understand what seaweed components and products and co-products can do for both, obviously, human food, but also for animal feeds.
Further research needs to be done to understand the extent to which Macrocystis or other native Falkland seaweeds may be able to reduce greenhouse gas release in livestock. Yet using it as a feed has a multitude of other benefits anyway.
We know that animals will go to the beach when they can and eat kelp. They have this knowledge in them that the nutrients that are available in kelp, and whenever grass and pastures in short supply, they'll eat from the beach, and they grow perfectly well in that. There's protein, there's other elements in kelp. So it has, in its natural state almost, it's got a potential role.
Not only could it be used for livestock feed, but it has already been implemented in the UK as an alternative to harmful pesticides and as a biostimulant to improve plant and soil quality.
It's also good for animal feed and agricultural products, and one of those that I think is quite exciting is a thing called biostimulant, which is used instead of high carbon, high nitrogen fertiliser on land. And it can allow plants to flourish in perhaps dry soil or soil of a different pH to what they might like. It just uses the natural properties of the plant. It boosts those properties and allows it to live and grow in areas where it might not be able to, or just to grow stronger in a good area. And that also avoids the use of high carbon and high nitrogen fertiliser, which makes it really good at breaking that nitrogen cycle, because that nitrogen ends up in rivers and then flows down into the sea, and it just shouldn't be there. So we can get better crops and less nitrogen, break the nitrogen cycle all in one go.
From a soil conditioner, a land management potential, I think kelp really we should have another look at kelp where it could fit into the picture, particularly as a climate change mitigation model. For example, in UK, they're using seaweed extract, kelp extract sprayed on golf courses and sports pastures, and it gives the pasture really terrific resilience to insect attack. It improves the greenness and the resilience of plants, which avoids the use of chemicals and other ways, to enhance your pastures or enhance grass. So it is having a lot of interest and use in the future, and it is the one natural resource the Falklands had that they could look at again from that point of view.
The market has expanded tenfold since it was initially looked into in the Falklands for use in potash. Now the product is used in cosmetics, food, chemical production, livestock feed, and many things in between. Since the industry was valued at $634.4 million in 2022 and is projected to grow to $1.2 billion by 2032, much more growth is anticipated.
We create our own products internally. We have a team of people and a factory onshore where we make our own products, and principally for us these are food seasonings. We've also got a range of bath and cosmetic products because a lot of the compounds found within seaweed are really good for your skin, and they make really good skincare, bath, cosmetic type products, and they've been popular also. We're partnering with other people to make things like seaweed beer, which is one of the most popular things we sell. In addition, it goes into gin and whiskey and lots of other alcoholic drinks. When we first started Seagrown, we thought we would have a problem with, let's say we've got a ton of wet kelp on the quayside. We'd be thinking, oh, what are we going to do with this now? That's absolutely not the case. The market is pulling, the demand is there. We don't need to push, it pulls. So that's got to be a very, very good sign. And I don't think there's a week that goes by that I don't see some clever character somewhere in the world has come up with another use, another application for seaweed or a seaweed product. The thing that I think is going to drive certainly our business is our ability to mitigate climate change and biodiversity loss, and also pollution. That's just not going away, and any and all measures that we can take to positively influence that, to put the brakes on it a little bit, are going to be marketable commodities. So I think that brings an entirely new economic dimension to this. Think of it as a seaweed as a service rather than as an actual commodity, and that again changes the economics.
Given a commitment soon to be made to reduce carbon emissions from the UK aviation industry, a new opportunity for more profitability from kelp could be on the horizon.
I also do know that a lot, in fact all the airlines, certainly from a UK perspective, there's legislation coming in that's going to force these airlines to use what's called SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. And they are looking for any and all sources of biomass to convert into bioethanol for SAF. So that is a market that I can see growing in the future, definitely, because we need to fly. We're a globalised society. We've got to get things around the world all the time, non-stop. But the carbon emissions from the aviation industry are immense, and that has to stop. So that's the changeover between hydrocarbons and SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, is going to happen, and that will be a huge growth industry for any biomass producer.
But the question that we all want to know is this truly an industry that can thrive in the Falkland Islands?
I'm talking from my own experience with the Falkland Islands and my experience in the seaweed industry. But I do believe there will be an economic case for kelp farming in the Falkland Islands. There are so many ways that you can benefit other people by farming kelp that it's just not possible that it wouldn't be viable, but we just need to find out how to do it, where to do it, and what the best application for it is to make that a viable proposition. But it will be doable, I'm convinced about that, and I think I would relish the chance to try.
When contacted for a statement regarding a kelp industry in the islands, the Falkland Islands Development Corporation said, FIDC has previously investigated the viability of kelp farming in the Falkland Islands, with the last substantial piece of work being the Sloan Report in 2005. We remain open to revisiting this initiative or any other initiative that would further develop the economy of the Falkland Islands.
The viability of a kelp industry in the Falkland Islands has been investigated sporadically for over a decade. With the increasing profitability of the industry, previous concerns may no longer be obstacles to the introduction of this unique opportunity. Since its uses are continuously evolving and given the predicted growth of the global seaweed market, it begs the question if now is finally the time for the Falkland Islands to stake its claim in the kelp industry.